Hi, welcome to Chapter 7 of The Parenting Connection. I'm Pam.
And I'm Jim.
And if you remember, in the last couple chapters, we've been talking about our brain and how our brain responds to trauma or threatening things happening to us. And what we talked about is how the impact of that decides how we function in the world, and it also helps decide how we relate to other people. So today, we're going to talk about power and how our emotions are related to power, and how power impacts the way that we function in the world, and also how we handle our relationships. I think it's going to be really interesting.
So let's take a look at anger and trauma and how that anger relates to power and our need for power.
Okay.
I've noticed, lots of other people have noticed, kids love superheroes. They do. They can name their favorite superheroes. They can probably name a dozen of them. And whether it's from comic books or movies, they're really familiar with superheroes. And I think probably the biggest reason they love them is because they're powerful. They all have some unique ability that sets them apart and gives them an edge in doing whatever they're out to do. Whether it's stopping bad guys or in a fight, they're powerful. You know, superheroes are, well, heroes. And there are heroes from history, like we talked about Katherine Johnson before in our kids video.
Hero.
There's Amelia Earhart, whether it's a mythic hero like Hercules, there's lots of different kinds of heroes. But again, they all have some trait that makes them special or powerful. And so that's very important. We all want to be powerful. And anger, you could say, is a kind of power. It is. And it's an attempt to make ourselves bigger. So when we feel angry about something, we're saying, there's a problem here, whether it's a situation or another person who's making us angry, and we think, I've got to do something. And that anger makes us feel, it kind of puffs us up. It makes us feel bigger, like we're going to go out and try to handle some problem. Mm-hmm.
It gives us energy.
It does. Another way of thinking about it is anger is sort of like a fire. Mm-hmm. It's like you might say, or think of it like it's like this internal fire. And if we don't listen to our anger, if we try to get away from it, if it scares us, that fire, you could say metaphorically maybe, it gets a little dimmer. And then we start to lose our ability to express our anger. Maybe it's too dangerous for us to do that, right? So we learn not to express our anger. And then with other people, maybe they really feel their anger and then they give into it and they really express it. So that fire gets bigger, and we all know fire is a dangerous thing when it gets out of control. And some people give in to their anger so much, you hear stories where people will say, well, I sort of blacked out. I don't know what happened. I got so angry, and then it was only later that I sort of came back to myself, and people had to tell me what I did or what I said. Mm-hmm. And you get the sense that's not really a great thing. That could be a very dangerous thing.
Because you're not really in control when you're so angry that you don't even know what you're doing, or you're not able to pull yourself back.
That's right, and you can well imagine that as a parent, your kids could be very frightened if they see that in action. Mm-hmm. Their parent losing control, mm-hmm. right? They don't know what's going to happen next.
And they're not able to defend themselves because they're smaller and weaker.
They just naturally have less power.
Right.
That's right. So it can be a dangerous thing. Now anger, however you look at it or experience it, it's a kind of upset. Like when we cry, we have the feeling something's not right. When we get angry, we have that same feeling something's not right. It's an upset, right? The status quo and how we're feeling, it starts to get upset. If you ever taken a rock and throw it in water, in a stream, it causes those ripples, those waves. And that's what anger does. It starts to make things go like that. It moves things.
That's right. And if I think right now about the protests that are happening in the streets of America, it's a way of anger being expressed that things are not okay the way they are, that people are being treated unfairly, and they're being harmed and even killed. And sometimes it looks like the anger coming at them is so out of control that it's not able to pull back before it does, extreme harm. And so anger and power are closely interlinked, and it's really important to understand how they impact each other and how we can protect ourselves and each other from out of control anger combined with power.
Right, and what we're saying in many ways is that anger is important and it's often very necessary.
Yes.
And if you like peace and quiet, anger can be scary.
Yes.
It really can be, but it's an important thing to learn how to experience.
And before, you talked a little bit about how the anger can sort of become dimmer. And I think sometimes when anger isn't able to be expressed, it turns inward and can manifest itself as depression. That people become angry with themselves, or they feel like they don't have any power. And so then they just start to sort of feel hopeless and helpless. And that's also a really destructive feeling, which can lead to outbursts or bullying, or even what we saw in some of the school shootings, where someone is sort of harboring these feelings of being isolated and not having a place in the group and being treated unfairly, and then it erupts with a whole enormous rage that sort of just devastates a community.
It's like when you keep the lid on the pot, right? It's a bit like a pressure cooker. That pressure builds up. It doesn't go away.
No.
It doesn't. So whether you keep it inside and it starts to hurt you, or whether you let it out and want to hurt other people, it's going to be there, and it calls for our attention. And the whole question seems to be, how are we going to deal with it? How are we going to handle it?
And how are we not going to visit it on some vulnerable person or
like
group
a child
of people,
or like a group of people
who have no ability to defend themselves?
And that's really where the power comes in, right? If you're the one experiencing the anger, paying attention to it and finding ways to express it in the best way you can, and it's always tricky. We rarely do it perfectly, especially when we're starting. When we're young, we don't know how to handle our anger. We may not even know how to identify it. That's why kids tend to use their fists and their feet, and they express it with their body.
Very physically.
Yes. And so it is. Anger is in our body, and if we don't deal with it, another thing is we can get all kinds of symptoms. Kids may have headaches. I don't want to go to school, right? Because maybe there's a kid who is bullying them.
Or stomach aches. Small children often express stress through their stomachs.
Yes.
So if every day they have a stomach ache, that means that they really don't feel safe going to school.
Yeah.
And we're not saying that then they shouldn't go to school.
Right.
It just means that they need more support, and they need to have a place to go with their fears, to talk things out, to help develop strategies to help them feel safer.
That's right, and we should listen to our kids and watch for those things and try to see if we can pay attention. Like, is this a big symptom that needs some attention, or just what does it call for?
Maybe we just need a little support.
A little support, maybe.
Send you an extra snack, along in your backpack, so that that when you see that, you'll remember that I was thinking about you.
Or listen to them talk about their day and some of the things they go through. And the thing is, if we don't learn how to deal with these things when we're a kid, and if we don't get help from parents and adults, often what happens is we carry these things with us throughout life, and later in life, it can become other symptoms like hypertension, migraines, all kinds of things. It's interesting if you look at history. The Greeks thought there should be a god just for anger and war. And later the Romans called him Mars, just like the planet Mars, or karate is called the martial arts. Even the month of March is named after this god of war, Mars. It turns out he was also a god of boundaries, which is somehow important to anger, right? Because when you feel angry, it's kind of telling you, wait, someone just crossed a line. We have that expression,
Right.
wait, you just crossed the line. You went too far.
It's a clue that someone stepped on your boundary.
Yes, or people will say, I felt violated by what they did. Someone does something and it doesn't feel appropriate. Like,
Right.
no, that's not right. You didn't respect my boundaries. Like, we all have this sort of personal space around us, whether it's physical or this idea about what it's okay or not okay to do. And if someone else goes too far, they took up too much space. Like, they went too far. And we feel like we need to remind them to stay in your lane, right? That's another very popular saying right now, which means like, hey, do what's appropriate. Respect your space, respect my space.
Well, and that's what lanes are about on the highway.
Yes.
If people don't stay in their lane, they could kill somebody.
And you start to get angry if you see someone encroaching on your space. You think, that's not right, get over.
Right, if your car comes over here, you could kill my family. So, yeah.
That's right, it is an important part of that. And one other thing about anger, and we've started to allude to this, it makes us feel bigger. It makes us feel, again, more powerful. And that often feels good. So as tricky as anger can be, it kind of feels good in a way. And I think at times when we go too far into it, we're craving that sense of power. And the anger is our way in, right? And so we let the anger get bigger, we feel more powerful. But again, if we don't feel powerful for ourselves and anger is the only way we're going to get there, it's going to be really tricky.
It's going to be hard to have relationships.
That's right, because we're going to need to show other people how powerful we are. Like, we're going to need to make a show of it. So instead of feeling secure, like I have power, I can do what I want, we're going to need to make a show of it. And if you're a parent, too often that happens with our kids. Our kids, they ask for something or they do something that, again, we think is not right. Now we have to make a show of our power. Like, we have to play the game of I'm stronger. And that game has a way of getting, more elevated and more dangerous. Yeah. And chances are we'll have to do it again and again. And the child will often become more and more resentful, angry. Now, how the child deals with it again,
depends on their temperament, right?
It depends, right.
They can come back big and strong and angry at you and rebel, or they could shrink down and sort of try to become invisible.
Right.
So each of those reactions is very different depending on who the child is.
That's right, but it starts what we call the power struggle.
Right.
So now that we've talked about anger, we can tell it's an important thing. Let's talk about some principles of power, because that's really what we want to get to here, is talk more about power. So, if we think about parenting and parenting styles, and we've talked about these before, let's talk about a spectrum or a continuum where the dictator is on one side and the doormat is on the other. And let's consider this. So we have our dictator, and over here we have our doormat. Okay, and this is all about power. We're all looking for power. So the dictator over here, they have all the power. And they're not sharing it. So the child really doesn't have a voice. They don't get to make decisions. And the parent, who is the dictator, again, they have all the power. It's my way or the highway. Over here with the doormat, they don't have the power. The child does. And again, the child has the voice. And they tend to make decisions, at least for themselves, what they want to do. Maybe in some cases they even tell the parent what they should do. But so the child makes their own decisions. And we can see, I think, how the dictator, it becomes a problem. Because if the dictator has all the power, they're probably going to abuse it. And over here with the doormat, if they don't have enough power, now they can't help the child understand what they need to do. They're not going to be very good at guiding them through life and helping them form healthy habits. So this is an issue, a problem, and that also can be an issue, a problem. It would be great if we could find a little bit of an area in the middle, kind of a sweet spot, where, the parent has power, which is important, But the child also has some power. Not a lot of power, especially when they're young. We don't want to give them much power because they can't handle it. But we want to learn how to share power between these two things. But this is not easy. And oftentimes as a parent, it takes a while to get here. We don't know how to do this at first. So what often happens is, if you've ever seen an old clock that has what they call a pendulum, the pendulum goes back and forth. So, the pendulum, sometimes if we're not sure about ourselves as a parent and we don't feel like we have enough power, we may tend to swing over this way and become a bit of a dictator. But then, after we do that, it may not feel good, and we may see how it hurts the child, and we think, oh, that wasn't right. Who knows, maybe we even apologize to the child. Now the pendulum tends to swing the other way, and maybe we go too far because we saw that we hurt the child with something we did or said, and now we give the child, too much power. And then we see the effects of that. Oh, now they're kind of doing whatever they want to do, and they're going to bed whenever they want to.
So there's guilt that sort of fuels that kind of giving over to the kids.
Yes.
Then you start to become angry.
Yes.
Because now the child has too much power.
That's right. And then the child starts to take advantage, right? They go beyond their boundaries of what they should be able to do, and we see that, and then we're like, oh, that's not right either. So the pendulum will start moving back in that direction. And this is not necessarily bad. I mean, I think maybe all of us to some degree do this in our relationships. And we're trying to find what's the right balance. Like, how do I go through my relationship with my child or other people, and how do I navigate that and feel like I'm getting it right?
Yeah, and I think as you get older and you learn about relationships and you learn about boundaries and you learn about yourself and other people, it gets easier. And you start to feel better about where you stand, and you start to understand better where other people stand, and you start to become more respectful of other people's boundaries, and you become more willing to stand for yourself and not let other people come over too far into your boundaries.
But you can see, you're right, it takes a lot of work, and we have to think about it for ourselves, talk to other people, read about it. It doesn't necessarily happen by itself, and it doesn't happen overnight.
No, it doesn't.
It takes time. I'm going to make another simple diagram here, and I think it'll make sense. So if we imagine our relationships, if we have a weak relationship, and we'll make R the relationship, if that is weak, probably we're going to see many, I'll put a little PS there for power struggles. So weak relationship, probably lots of power struggles. And then the opposite is also true. If we have a strong relationship, okay, things are going well, we're talking, we're relating. As a parent, I have power, but I also let my child have some power, and things are going well. Chances are there may not be many power struggles. Because think about that, think about the words, power, struggle, right? Our kids will have to struggle to get power. Well, if we don't give them a reason to struggle, if we share it with them, they don't have to fight us for it. And that will make the relationship stronger. And it, as you said, it's not the same as letting them do whatever they want and make them happy. That's not necessarily it.
Right. It's about looking at what stage of development they're at and what kind of power they can handle. I was just with my 1-year-old grandson this weekend, and giving him power means knowing that he likes to get down on the floor, he likes to do the army crawl, he likes to feed his little puffs to the dog, and giving him opportunities to do the things that he enjoys, but at the same time recognizing that there's boundaries. So, when it's time to, I can't sit and watch him or supervise him right now, then I'm going to have to maybe put him in his height chair for a little while or do something what that I need him to do so that he can be safe. So even at a tiny age, and this starts to grow to the point
That's
where
right.
your child says, I want to take the car to my friend's house, and you say either yes, that's fine, or you know what, so-and-so needs to go to work today, so the car is unavailable. And there's a respect between you so that you can work out some of these problems.
That is a great point. As they get older, they probably deserve more power if they've
Sure,
been,
they do.
if they seem responsible.
As they learn to mature, they get more power, and with that
Right.
comes more responsibility.
That's right. And when we say no to them, which oftentimes is very important, as they get older, we usually owe them a little bit more of an explanation too as to why. If we just say no and we always just leave it at no, that's going to start to feel a little disrespectful to them. Like they don't value the ability to talk about things or to hear me out as a person.
Right, when we
and to
talked
hear my
about
thought process.
the negotiable rules climate, that's a climate where people are allowed to discuss and to solve problems together and to come to mutually agreeable decisions. That works a whole lot better than one person just dictating to the other.
Yes, and this brings up another good point, and you've alluded to it. We can be flexible. We don't always have to, like if we say no, maybe sometimes we change our mind. Now, if we're always changing our mind, that's probably not a good thing, right? We need to learn how to say no and mean it, and the person who's in the position to say no has the power. But if we never change our mind, or if the rules we have are always set, like there's never any talking about it or budging, kids will, sometimes they think, well, they never listen to me. They won't hear me out. And especially, again, as they get older, they may need a chance to argue their case. And sometimes by giving in and saying, okay, I see your point, that can be a real vote of confidence to kids, that we see them, that we're attuned to them, as you've said.
Right, and if you always say no to them, they may just, some children will decide, well, then I'm just going to do it anyway, because I'm never going to get to do the things I want to do unless I just take the power from the parent. And so that's where rebellion really starts to come in.
Yes, and then we want to punish them for being sneaky. Well, sometimes maybe it's a sign that we're not sharing enough power with them.
Right, and we're going to talk a little bit more about how we can do that safely.
Yeah.
So remember in the last two chapters how we talked about the brain and how our brainstem is the part of ourselves that becomes activated under threat. And when we have that threat, we may become very angry, as we said earlier in this session. And that anger causes us to become bigger and faster and stronger and more powerful. And that's really helpful when you're in a situation where you're threatened by maybe an animal or somebody who intends to do you harm, and you need to either run away or defend yourself. But there's another type of power that happens when we talk. Remember how we talked about when you're regulated and you're calm, you're more able to relate to people, and when you're more connected and feeling safe, you're able to do a lot of higher thinking and higher processing. And that's what I want to talk about now. So when you're able to process and you're able to focus, you can learn to do all sorts of complicated things. We learn how to read and write. We learn how to, ride bicycles, drive cars, fix technology, use complicated computers. And one of the things that helps people feel powerful is knowing how to do things well. So that's why we really impress on parents the importance of school, because in our society, you can get a better job or a more interesting job oftentimes if you can learn things. And that learning can happen in so many different ways. I mean, of course, there's athletes, who learn to do their sport extremely well. That takes hours and hours of practice and focus and the ability to be mentored by someone with expertise. The same thing with like fixing a car or designing a car or designing a house or designing anything, learning how to pilot an airplane. There's all these amazing skills that are available to us, and once we learn how to do those, that in and of itself gives us power. So how do we know if we're helping our kids achieve that kind of really positive power? Well, it starts with the heart. And in our children's program, we put our hands over our heart and we say a little verse. There lives in me an image of all that I can be. Until I have become it, my heart is never free. And really what we're saying there is that to explore our potential, our heart needs to be able to express itself. And the word courage comes from the French word coeur, which means heart. So to encourage someone means to give them courage. And how do we do that? Well, the first way that we give someone courage, and in this case children, is that we show confidence. We believe in them. So to show confidence means, I know that you're going to do well in school today. And we don't even always have to say it with words. By packing their lunch and sending them out the door with a smile and a kiss, it says to them, you can go to school and be okay. So those types of subtle ways of encouragement, of showing confidence, of believing in your child are so important to their having confidence in themselves. I remember a parent in class once said to me, I believe in myself because you believe in me. And what that said to me is, I have a lot of responsibility in the way that I interact with parents, just like parents have a lot of responsibility in the way that they interact with their children, because they have a lot of influence. The second way that we give children courage or encourage them is through building on their strengths, noticing what they do well, noticing what they're good at, and complimenting it. They bring something home from school, you hang it on your refrigerator. You tell, your husband or your partner or your mother comes home and you say, look at this beautiful drawing, or look at this really interesting piece that so-and-so made today. I really think it's very special. So building on their strengths, noticing what they're good at. You seem to really like to drum a lot. Maybe we could get you some drum lessons. Or maybe we could get you into the band. The third one is acceptance. If everything has to be perfect and a child is never good enough, there's no room for them to start and try and fail and come back and do it again. And we know that everything that we learn has an element of failure in it. A child does not stand up and walk for the first time without falling down or getting back up over and over. It's a process. All of life is a process, and all of it takes practice and the safety in which to fail. And so we accept children where they're at, and we encourage them by showing confidence and by building on what they're already good at. And then the fourth encouragement is called fostering independence. And that means we want them to have a sense of being able to solve problems and do things on their own. And the only way they're going to learn that is to give them opportunities to try. And so letting them try to feed themselves, letting them try to ride a bike, knowing that, inevitably they're probably going to crash. But it's okay, because most things are not deadly when you make a mistake. Of course, if they are, you naturally wouldn't let a 2-year-old run into the street. But when you think about it reasonably, reasonable opportunities at the right age. So what happens when we don't encourage children? There's another word called discouragement, and that means to take away courage. And there's things that we all do, sometimes with very good intentions, but nevertheless, it makes children feel more hopeless or helpless. And so the opposite of showing confidence would be negative expectations, that you expect them to fail. You don't expect them to be able to do something. And that creates a lack of courage. It causes children not to want to take a risk. The second discouragement is focusing on mistakes. Again, rather than being what's called strength-based or looking at what's going well, you focus on always the mistakes or what didn't turn out quite perfectly. And after a while, the child feels like, I'm never good enough. And even when they become successful, they can't really appreciate it because they always feel like it wasn't enough. And that is a very sort of heavy feeling for someone to carry through their life, that they're never good enough. The third discouragement would be perfectionism. Again, the opposite of acceptance, that I can't love you unless you meet my expectations. You know, if you decide that you want to be a writer or an English major, and I've decided the only thing that really I can be proud of is if you are a doctor, then I feel like I can never meet my parents' expectations, and therefore, again, I'll never be good enough. So maybe why even try? Maybe I won't even go to school at all, because I really think I'll never be able to be a doctor. And in fact, I don't even want to be a doctor. The fourth discouragement is overprotection. And again, this is something that might seem like I love my child so much that I don't want them to get hurt, or I don't want them to suffer or experience pain. But the truth is that life is filled with pain and suffering, and it's part of growth. And anytime we grow and go into a new level of being able to do something, we're leaving behind our old self. And it's interesting, I've been listening lately to some discussions and lectures by a man named Cornel West, and he talks about the ancient philosophers, Plato and Socrates, and how they talk about learning as a type of death. That when you learn something new or you grow in a new way, there's a part of you that needs to die to leave behind the parts of you that were younger and less mature. And even though that's a positive thing, it's a painful thing. A lot of us would love to go back and be children again, with someone taking care of us and where we could, play freely and not have to have as many cares and responsibilities. But we know that a lot of children never really experience that because they live in households where they don't feel safe. They don't get to have the type of encouragement that allows them to sort of explore their gifts and to become the dreams that they would like to have for themselves. So as parents, we have so much power in terms of the type of climate that we set for our children, the type of support that we give them, and our willingness to attune to them and get to know who they are in and of themselves and to accept them just the way they are. So we've been talking a lot about power, anger, encouragement, discouraging. Do you ever remember a time in your life when someone encouraged you?
My dad could be very encouraging at times. Mm-hmm. He recognized that I like to draw, and if I came home with a drawing and showed it, he might get really excited about that.
Wow.
And maybe hang it on the fridge, and he could be very encouraging.
And because he was a sort of a powerful kind of a guy, that really meant a lot to you when he gave you something that made you feel like you could do something well.
It did. It felt really good. It made you feel special. It made you feel like, oh, I like to do this. Maybe I'm good at it, and they see that.
Yeah. Yeah, and when I do this, my parents really appreciate who I am, and they value me. And so then you went on and you actually studied art.
I did. I became an art teacher, yeah.
And you are a wonderful artist who sometimes does art for our videos. So
thank you.
We really appreciate that.
Thank you. Let's have some tea.
Oh, that's great. So I think, if we all think back, usually there's at least one person in our life who has said something or done something that has really helped us to feel confident in ourselves and something we can do. And another thing that we didn't mention as much is that when you feel confident, you're more willing to take risks. And that means you're more willing to try new things, which lead to more learning and more growth. So that's a really, really important part of human beings becoming what they're really able to become.
It is a popular saying in our parenting class, the child who feels right acts right.
That's right.
And the same is true for adults. We're all like that. And the anger, again, is sort of the flip side of that. Something doesn't feel right. Something doesn't seem right. And so until that gets resolved, we don't quite feel like everything has been addressed and talked about and settled. And we don't feel quite right until something gets done about that.
So a story we often read in class about encouragement has to do with the famous author Nathaniel Hawthorne. Some of the greatest success stories of history have followed a word of encouragement or an act of confidence by a loved one or a trusting friend. Had it not been for a confident wife, Sophia, we might not have listed among the great names of literature the name of Nathaniel Hawthorne. When Nathaniel, a heartbroken man, went home to tell his wife that he was a failure and had been fired from his job in a custom house, she surprised him with an exclamation of joy. "Now," she said triumphantly, "you can write your book." "Yes," replied the man with sagging confidence, "and what shall we live on while I am writing it?" To his amazement, she opened a drawer and pulled out a substantial amount of money. "Where on earth did you get that?" he exclaimed. "I have always known you were a man of genius," she told him. "I knew that someday you would write a masterpiece. So every week, out of the money you gave me for housekeeping, I saved a little bit. So here is enough to last us 1 whole year." From her trust and confidence came one of the greatest novels of American literature, The Scarlet Letter. So today we talked about the brain a little bit more and how that relates to anger, emotion, power. We also talked about power in parenting and how the power that parents have can really impact sort of the path or the trajectory of their children as they go through their lives. And then we talked about the importance of, Jim talked about anger throughout history and the principles of power, and how the stronger the relationship, the less the power struggles. The weaker the relationship, the stronger, the more the power struggles. And what that means is that as we want to form really strong relationships with our kids so that we have influence over them as they get older and are making some harder decisions.
And if we're not sharing the power just a little bit early on and more as they get older, that relationship is not going to be there. If we take all the power for ourselves.
They won't trust that we see them and value them.
That's right.
And they won't have the confidence that we talked about with the encouragement and the discouragement.
And this has so much to do with respect, too. That's just another word for it, I think, right? We hear a lot of parents talk about, oh, I don't get respect, and my child doesn't respect well. It has to do with all these issues: relationship, sharing power, all that.
Exactly. So next time, we're going to talk more about communication and how we can communicate with our kids in ways that help them to feel more powerful and more connected to us. So we can't wait to see you then. Have a good week.